And employees claim there are places along the tracks where radio communication is impossible, so-called dead spots.
And it's not a dead spot that's there 365 days out of the year.
The possibility was also examined and dismissed.
Sometimes you can't. Some radios are stronger, some are weaker.
The second test done as far as communications between the locomotive and the caboose was done with the same type of radio as was used at the time the accident took place. A field test with that type of radio had satisfactory performance.
The evidence was pretty clear, and we concluded that there were no dead spots.
If the signals were read and the radios were working, why had the train crashed?
Okay, so just explain to me how these...
Foisey examines an ingenious piece of technology, the hotbox detector. Sitting beside the track, hotboxes monitor the temperature of a train's wheels and axles. They also record the speed of trains as they roar by. When Foisey and his advisors examine the hotbox data, they make a telling discovery. When the front of the freight train passed the hotbox detector just after Hargwind, it was traveling a little over 60 kilometers an hour. But by the time the caboose passed it, the train was going more than 74 kilometers an hour. Despite the signals telling it to slow down, the train was speeding up.
For the last 5 miles, we were able to determine that the freight train was going at least 59 miles an hour, perhaps as high as 60 or 61. There were no brake applications before the crash as well.
The crew let the train travel too fast. They did not heed signals to stop, and they never applied the brakes. It all points to a train that was out of control.
Why there were no brake applications is difficult to understand.
With mechanical problems ruled out, Foisey begins to examine the crew of the freight train. Perhaps there's something about engineer Jack Hudson, who was in charge of the train, that could explain what happened that day. As Foisey begins sifting through Hudson's medical records and interviewing his family, he makes a disturbing discovery. A train collision in Western Canada has killed 23 people. Another 71 are injured. The man leading the inquiry into the disaster has ruled out mechanical problems. Judge Rene Foisey now takes a closer look at Jack Hudson, the 16-year veteran who was driving the freight train. When Foisey and the Commission review Hudson's medical files, they're shocked by what they discover.
Mr. Hudson was a man who was sick. He was an alcoholic. He had high blood pressure, which was problematic. He had diabetes. He had a pancreatic attack the summer before this accident. He had to wear a colostomy for a number of months.
Foisey wonders if this long list of illnesses could somehow have led to the train crash.
The engineer Jack Hudson had been killed outright in the crash and had severe injuries. So we couldn't determine whether there'd been a catastrophic medical event, whether he'd had a heart attack, for example, or a stroke, which had incapacitated him. But we were able to do toxicology, and there was no alcohol or drugs present.
He did have a lot of health problems, and he had some problems at home. These problems at home appeared to be on the mend, and that he was not the kind of man who, if he was going to commit suicide, would take 23 people with him and injure another 70, some of them very, very seriously. So we discounted that possibility of a suicide.
If it wasn't suicide, if Hudson did have a stroke or heart attack at the controls, why didn't his brakeman, Mark Edwards, take any action? Investigators come up with one plausible answer.
Did you get some rest?
Not much. Got a touch of the flu. Could use a full night's sleep.
Perhaps Edwards had been asleep on the job. Dr. Alison Smiley is an expert on sleep and fatigue.
Jack Hudson, he had at the very most, before he went on duty that day, 3.5 hours of sleep. And that is if he slept from the last moment somebody saw him till the moment somebody next saw him again, 3.5 hours. Brakeman said he had a touch of the flu and he'd had 5 hours sleep the night before. Wayne Smith similarly had insufficient sleep, about 5 hours before the collision.
As the freight train passed the signals telling it to stop, the entire crew may have been fast asleep.
You could work at any time of the day. So one day you might start at 4 o'clock in the morning, the next day you start at 2 in the afternoon. Their hours were so erratic, they were continually in a jet lag state because their physiology was never sort of fully adjusted to any particular working hours.
When it comes to staying alert, train engineers face many challenges, including long rides up and down the same stretch of track.
The tracks going by one after the other, it's a very soporific situation to work in, and easy to see how somebody, no matter how motivated, could fall asleep.
At the time, trains were equipped with safety devices that would automatically stop a train if the engine man died or fell asleep, the so-called dead man's pedal.
Basically, the engineer is supposed to keep his foot on the pedal, and while his foot is on the pedal, the train won't stop. If that pedal isn't depressed, then it will, after a number of seconds, give a warning, which is quite audible. And if nothing happens, then it will stop the train.
But Foisey discovers that for many trainmen, disabling the dead man's pedal is standard practice.
One of the excuses that was given by the engineers is that to go long distances, having to keep your foot on that pedal was very uncomfortable. And so that they would sometimes put something on the pedal, a lunchbox or something heavy enough to keep it depressed so that they could stretch their legs. Unfortunately, what was happening, this pedal was being depressed for long, long periods of time.
But even if Edwards and Hudson had fallen asleep at the front of the train, and the dead man's pedal was rigged, conductor Wayne Smith at the back could still have prevented the disaster. Almost 2 months into the Foisey inquiry, Smith takes the stand. Doctors had kept him from testifying earlier, saying he was too traumatized by the accident. Now, for the first time, investigators will hear Smith reconstruct events on board his train in the moments leading up to the disaster.
I was sitting looking out the back of the train from my desk when we passed mileboard 169. That's the landmark that I used to initiate a call to the engineer to ask for the display at the Dalehurst approach signal. Head end to 413. What indication do you have at the Dalehurst approach signal 1703? Over. Head end to 413.
The front end of the train is supposed to respond, letting Smith know that they've seen the signal lights telling them to slow down.
Head of 413. Can you hear me? Over. I probably called him 3 or 4 times. I didn't get a response on my gray radio. There was something wrong with it. What's the indication at signal 1703? Over.
It's a surprising piece of testimony. Foisey already knows the radios were working fine. When Smith is asked how fast he thought the train was going before the collision, Foisey gets another surprise.
I felt the front end give a light brake application on the caboose. Coming around the curve, I felt we were doing a track speed of about 50 miles an hour or less.
But according to the hotbox detectors, the train was traveling almost 16 kilometers an hour over track speed, and there was never any application of the brakes.
I went to my red radio, and I tried to get a hold of him on it. Jack, how's the Dalehurst approach signal 1703? I was calling him on channel 1 3 or 4 times, and there was no answer, so I tried to get a hold of him on different channels.
But once again, Smith's testimony doesn't add up. Foisey has heard from other trainmen who were monitoring their radios in the area that day. No one heard Smith call. Smith says he was still trying to contact Hudson when the end of the train raced past signals telling it to slow down.
Jack!
As an experienced trainman,